David's headlights pierce through the mountain dusk when he spots her. A small figure walking alongside a dog on the desolate road. She's calm, too calm for a child alone at this hour. Her shoes are covered in red dust, and she keeps glancing anxiously toward the darkening mountains. When he asks where she came from, her eyes fill with tears. The reason this little girl was alone on that mountain road will leave you speechless. Mountain roads can be treacherous places after sunset. The winding paths, steep drops, and growing darkness create an atmosphere where anything can happen. But on this particular evening, David Thompson was about to encounter something far more unsettling than the usual dangers of mountain driving. It had been a long day at the construction site where David worked as a project manager. The autumn sun was already setting behind the peaks, casting long shadows across the valley. David knew these roads well. He'd been taking this route home for the past 5 years. Every curve, every turnout, every hazard was familiar to him. That's why the sight ahead made him instantly slow down. His experienced eyes weren't playing tricks on him. There was definitely a small figure walking along the shoulder of the road. As he carefully approached, his headlights revealed more details. A child, walking alongside what appeared to be a golden retriever. David's mind raced through possibilities. The nearest town was miles away. There were a few scattered homes in these mountains, but none close enough to explain a young girl walking alone at this hour. Something wasn't right. He pulled over about 20 feet ahead of the girl, turning on his hazard lights to alert any approaching vehicles. The dog immediately moved closer to the child, protective but not aggressive. David stepped out of his truck, keeping his movements slow and deliberate. The girl didn't seem startled by his presence. In fact, her composure was almost unnatural for someone her age in this situation. She appeared to be around 8 years old, wearing a light jacket despite the growing evening chill. But what caught David's attention most was the thick red dust covering her shoes. Dust that didn't belong on this part of the mountain. David maintained a safe distance as he called out to her. The girl's calm demeanor contrasted sharply with the worry in her eyes. When he asked if she needed help, she nodded without hesitation. But it was her next words that made David's concern deepen. She wasn't the one who needed help, she explained. It was her brother, Tommy. When David gently inquired about her parents, the girl's composure wavered slightly. Her answers became evasive, her eyes darting toward the darkening mountains behind them. She wouldn't say where they were, only that they couldn't be reached. The old retriever pressed against her leg, as if sensing her discomfort. David had kids of his own, and every parental instinct was telling him this situation was more complex than it appeared. The girl introduced herself as Sarah, but remained guarded about other details. She kept glancing back toward the mountains with growing anxiety, checking her watch every few minutes. As darkness continued to fall, David knew he needed to gain Sarah's trust quickly. He noticed how she flinched when he mentioned calling the authorities. There was fear in her reaction. Not fear of him, but fear of something else. Something that made this young girl choose to walk alone on a mountain road rather than seek help through normal channels. Sarah's story began to emerge in small pieces. She spoke about her brother Tommy, her voice filled with concern but also defensiveness. According to Sarah, their parents had been increasingly harsh with Tommy lately. Every mistake, no matter how small, turned into lengthy lectures about responsibility and consequences. The pattern had become clear in their household. Any misstep led to severe punishment and endless discussions about poor judgment. Sarah described how Tommy had started keeping secrets, pulling away from their parents. She had become his confidant, the only person he felt he could trust without fear of judgment. As Sarah shared these details, David noticed her becoming increasingly anxious about the time. The sun had nearly set now, and the temperature was dropping rapidly. Whatever situation Tommy was in, Sarah's urgency suggested it was serious. David knew he needed to convince her that some dangers outweighed any punishment she or her brother might face. Finally, Sarah made a decision. She pointed toward a distant ridge and mentioned an old access road. David's blood ran cold. He knew exactly where she was indicating. It was an abandoned mining area, notorious among local construction workers for its unstable tunnels and dangerous conditions. David immediately called emergency services, his worst fears confirmed when Sarah revealed she had walked 3 miles from the mining site. The dispatcher's voice became tense upon hearing the location. Within minutes, multiple rescue units were mobilized, including a specialized mine rescue team. The response team arrived with surprising speed, their vehicle's lights cutting through the growing darkness. As they gathered their equipment, the team leader shared a chilling detail with David. Recent surveys had shown the mining area's support structures were critically compromised. Any disturbance could trigger a catastrophic collapse. Sarah led them to a specific tunnel entrance, partially hidden behind overgrown brush. The rescue team worked methodically, calling out into the darkness. After what seemed like an eternity, they heard responses, multiple young voices calling back from deep within the tunnel. The rescue itself was a delicate operation. The team found Tommy and 3 of his friends nearly 200 feet into the tunnel. One boy had suffered a broken leg in a fall, which had trapped the group inside. They had been there for hours, afraid to call for help, and unsure how to get their injured friend out. Tommy's decision to send Sarah for help hadn't come easily. He had been secretly meeting friends at the mining site for weeks, convinced they had discovered something valuable in the old tunnels. When his friend got hurt, Tommy faced a terrible choice: call their parents and face severe punishment, or try to handle it themselves. The fear of his parents' reaction had paralyzed him. The last time Tommy had done something his father considered dangerous, climbing onto their roof to retrieve a drone, he'd been grounded for 2 months. Every day brought new lectures about his poor judgment and irresponsibility. The thought of facing that again, especially after explicitly being warned about dangerous behavior, was overwhelming. So instead, he had turned to the only person he truly trusted, his little sister. Sarah had promised to find help without involving their parents, and she had kept that promise, even though it meant walking miles alone on mountain roads as darkness approached. As the rescue team carefully extracted the boys from the tunnel, they revealed something that made everyone's blood run cold. The support beams in that section of tunnel showed severe structural fatigue. The whole passage could have collapsed at any moment, burying everyone inside under tons of rock and earth. The aftermath of the incident forced Tommy and Sarah's parents to face some difficult truths. Their children's actions had been dangerous. There was no question about that. But what shook them to their core was the realization that their children had felt safer in a collapsing mine than facing their parents' reaction. The constant criticism and harsh punishments hadn't made their children more responsible. They had achieved the opposite effect. Instead of learning to make better decisions, their children had learned to hide their mistakes. Instead of coming to their parents for help in dangerous situations, they had risked their lives to avoid confrontation. This revelation hit Tommy and Sarah's parents hard. They had always believed their strict approach was preparing their children for the real world, teaching them about consequences and responsibility. Instead, they had created an environment where their children felt they couldn't ask for help when they needed it most. The incident became a watershed moment for the family. While Tommy did face consequences for his actions, the nature of those consequences changed dramatically. His parents finally understood that their role wasn't just to punish mistakes, but to create an environment where their children felt safe coming to them with problems. The transformation wasn't immediate, but it was profound. Family counseling helped them develop new ways of communicating. They learned to listen more and lecture less, to guide rather than criticize. Most importantly, they worked to rebuild the trust that had been eroded by years of harsh reactions and excessive punishment. Looking back, David often thought about that evening, and the little girl he'd found on the mountain road. Her bravery in seeking help had ultimately saved 4 lives. But the deeper lesson wasn't about the dangers of abandoned mines or the importance of making good decisions. It was about the unintended consequences of fear, how trying to keep children safe through harsh punishment can sometimes put them in even greater danger. And you, what would you do if you discovered your parenting style was pushing your children away? How would you rebuild that trust?